not afraid of Donald Trump running again in 4 years. I'm afraid he's going to run again and lose, because he can do this again.
House impeachment managers hammering away at former President Trump, showing video of his supporters assaulting police physically and verbally, saying that Trump lit the fuse, delighted in the attack, did nothing to stop it, and showed no remorse, using his own words and tweets to portray a pattern of inciting violence. The prosecution now resting and anticipating the arguments to come.
But common sense is also the sense that we all have in common as a community. Senators, America, we need to exercise our common sense about what happened. Let's not get caught up in a lot of outlandish lawyers' theories here.
Now, the former president's defense team gets to make their case. Chilling new allegations against members of the extremist group the Oath Keepers charged in the Capitol insurrection. Prosecutors say they had planned a so-called quick reaction force with militia members staged outside of Washington, allegedly waiting for the order from President Trump before going in. In tonight's Vaccine Watch, the massive push to get doses to pharmacies. This is a historic moment. But the big question, what do you do if you don't live near one? Slipping from democracy. The situation in Myanmar after the Biden administration levies sanctions against the military there, calling their seize of power a coup, as we're on the ground with the people pushing back in resistance. The deadly ice storm from Texas to Kentucky. The 100-car pileup on an interstate, frightening moment. A FedEx truck slams into the other vehicles. The forecast tonight as 40 states remain under winter weather alerts. Carving out his way, the figure skater who's captivated many a social media feed with his breathtaking videos. Why it hasn't been always smooth skating for him, and what it's like to break barriers and build a more inclusive community.
What motivates you?
To live in a better world. To live in a world where you see unity, you see people that operate from a space of love and not from a space of fear.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. You can't ride with the cops, but root for the robbers, a quote used today as part of the closing arguments from the House impeachment managers. And with one final urge for the senators to use common sense in their vote, they rested their case. Over the last few days, many reminders of the raw emotion of January 6th. The House impeachment managers trying to connect the dots and place the cause of the riot at Donald Trump's doorstep. Some Republican senators have called the evidence moving. Others have described it as damning. There were tears on the Senate floor throughout the week as staffers and members of Congress struggled to relive what happened that day and how to ensure it doesn't happen again. Tonight, it appears it's still an uphill battle to reach the necessary 67 votes to convict. We are standing by to talk with two jurors in the trial, Democratic Senator Chris Coons and Republican Senator Kevin Cramer. But first, our congressional correspondent Rachel Scott leads us off.
On day 3 of the impeachment trial, House managers warned what we saw in our nation's capital could happen again if the former president isn't held accountable. They argued the president delighted in what he saw that day, and they repeatedly played supporters in their own words, saying they were there. They were breaching the Capitol, quote, fighting for Trump.
Thank you. You have to show strength.
Yes.
The Capitol building.
Insisting Donald Trump lit the fuse, that he invited them himself, already pointing out the president's tweet, be there on January 6th, quote, will be wild. Today, House impeachment managers argued the former president knew when he asked those in attendance to fight for him, they would, playing their own words, arguing it makes it clear who they were listening to.
Me personally, I do not feel a sense of shame or guilt from my heart from what I was doing. I thought I was following my president. I thought I was following what we were called to do. He asked us to fly there. He asked us to be there. So I was doing what he asked us to do.
If it comes down to war, guess what? I'm going to be there.
We're all going to be up here, and we're going to be breaking those windows.
Shouting at officers, quote, we're listening to Trump, your boss.
Million of us out there, and we are listening to Trump, your boss.
And they quoted an attorney for one of those rioters under arrest and charged. He was there at the invitation of the president.
Any guy that can do a
House
body
managers
slam.
arguing the president himself, with his words, ignited the attack.
He struck a match,
A little more violent.
and he aimed it straight at this building, at us.
And the Democrats, acting as prosecutors, said this was hardly the first time the former president encouraged violence with his words. Lead manager Jamie Raskin said it was the former president's essential MO for years.
The insurrection was the most violent and dangerous episode so far in Donald Trump's continuing pattern and practice of inciting violence. But I emphasize so far.
Raskin pointing to Trump's calls to, quote, liberate Michigan. After COVID restrictions there, he called it a dress rehearsal for the insurrection. Trump called those who stormed Michigan's Capitol very good people. They pointed to Charlottesville.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
And what the president said after.
You also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
This pro-Trump insurrection did not spring into life out of thin air.
They argued today race also played a role. Trump emboldening white supremacists in the mob who hurled racist slurs at black officers. They said one officer, with tears on his face, asked, "Is this America?" A question they asked again today.
Is this America? What is your answer to that question? Is this okay? If not, what are we going to do about it? These people matter. These people who risk their lives for us. And I ask each of you, when you cast your vote, to remember them and honor them.
The House managers arguing the president's repeated use of the First Amendment as his defense will not work. Arguing as president, your words matter even more.
An argument they say was also made by late conservative Justice Antonin Scalia.
Justice Scalia got it exactly right on this. He wrote on these cases about how the First Amendment affects people who take on a public office. He said, you can't ride with the cops, but root for the robbers. You can't ride with the cops, but root for the robbers. That's what Justice Scalia said. Our president, whoever he or she is, must choose the side of the Constitution. Must. And not the side of the insurrection or the coup or anybody who's coming against us. And if he or she chooses the wrong side, I'm sorry.
Democrats acknowledging the trial has been emotional, triggering. They know it has affected Democrats and Republicans, senators who now sit as jurors. But many Republicans who were moved by what they saw still giving no indication they will convict. The lead manager asking them, if this is not impeachable, what would be?
My dear colleagues, is there any political leader in this room who believes that if he is ever allowed by the Senate to get back into the Oval Office, Donald Trump would stop inciting violence to get his way? Would you bet the lives of more police officers on that? Would you bet the safety of your family on that? Would you bet the future of your democracy on that?
Chilling line of questioning there. Rachel Scott joins us now once again from the Capitol. Rachel, President Biden didn't watch yesterday's arguments, but he did weigh in this morning after seeing news coverage. Let's take a listen.
I think the Senate has a very important job to complete, and I think my guess is some minds may have been changed, but I don't know.
But again, this all comes down to whether enough Republican senators will be swayed. What did you see today as far as senators watching and reacting to today's arguments, and whether you felt viscerally perhaps that any minds might have been changed, or that they were at least open to changing their minds?
Yeah, well, Lindsay, inside of that chamber, several Republicans really could not pay attention. They were seen falling asleep at some points, flipping through magazines. In fact, as House impeachment manager Jamie Raskin delivered that line, saying if this is not an impeachable offense, then what would be? Senator Joni Ernst was flipping through a magazine as he said those words. So the bottom line here is you have a handful of Republicans. You have Senator Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. They were taking extensive notes inside. But Democrats need more than a handful. They need at least 17 to support them in order to convict. Right now, that is just not there. And while many senators were stunned by the images that they saw this week, few were swayed. In fact, Senator Lindsey Graham, leaving the chamber tonight, he was asked if he had heard anything that would have changed his mind. Lindsey, he answered in one word, no.
Rachel Scott, our thanks to you. Joining us now is North Dakota Republican Senator Kevin Cramer. Senator, thank you so much for your time tonight. Walk us through the arguments that you've heard the past few days. Your colleague, Senator Cassidy, of course, was swayed enough to change his vote on the constitutionality of the trial. Were you moved by the new videos, an emotional blow-by-blow of what happened?
You know, interesting point, because I wasn't overly moved by that in terms of conviction verdict. I was moved by it, but because, of course, I witnessed it. And I think that was perhaps one of the bigger challenges the managers had, is that they were trying to convince people how bad the events of January 6th were, people who'd lived through it like they did. And so it was moving, but I don't think it was, at least for me personally, I don't think it was compelling to the argument that the president is culpable for it. That's a separate matter, but yeah, I mean, certainly, and I have to compliment, by the way, the managers. I think they were far better than the managers were a year ago in the previous impeachment effort. I think the manager, Raskin, was particularly effective. Obviously, a very bright guy. I was thinking, gee, I'd like to take a class from him. I thought some of the others that were good included certainly Nagus from Colorado. I thought he was very good in his presentation. Plaskett from the Virgin Islands. So some of these people I served with in the House, of course, previously. So they did as good a job, I think, as they could in presenting the case. They certainly had a lot of nice, video and well edited and those kinds of things. But again, I think it was a difficult challenge for them to convince us while we were also witnesses.
To that point, the idea of the definition of inciting, meaning to urge on or to stir up, what kind of evidence could they have possibly presented? What would it have taken? Because, the idea that they're suggesting as well, not only did he maybe incite it, but that he didn't try and stop it. So he didn't call in the National Guard while lives were at risk, or while he sent the tweet when he knew that the rioters had actually breached the Capitol, he was still then talking about the lack of courage from Mike Pence. So in your estimation, what would it have taken?
Yeah, so it's a great point, because I think one of the challenges that they had was the timelines and things that they were presenting, thinking about things in real time as we were living them out. It wasn't difficult to imagine that the president was, doing and thinking one thing while these other things were happening, even on TV, but down the street, and I think that a couple of things that come to mind. For one thing, I think Mr. Nagus in his closing arguments asked a very important question. Was this foreseeable? And I think he thought that for everybody in the room that the answer would be yes. And I thought it was an answer that wasn't very effective for them, because I don't think it was foreseeable. I think when you look at the whole, the wholeness of President Trump's 4 years, his rhetoric, his rallies, the use of words, nobody foresaw, he certainly didn't foresee that there would be violence as a part of it. And so I think that's going to be hard for them. The other fact is that they haven't even used, the defense no doubt will, but that's the actual call to action in his speech itself, which was go and peacefully protest. So if he'd have said go and not fight like hell, but go and break into the Capitol, smash your way in and try to do harm to people, that would have been, that would have been obviously more culpable.
Well, still, he did use words like fight, 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 but I'll move on from there. The Senate, as you know, voted 56-44 that the trial was constitutional. In your view, is it your obligation and that of your colleagues at this point to vote the case on the merits of the facts? The House impeachment managers closed with the argument that in a court of law, if a constitutionality argument is dismissed by a judge, each side has to then move forward, and the jury or judge has to then consider the case. They can't go back and say, well, we didn't view the trial as constitutional.
So herein lies what I think is going to be an interesting question. It's going to be different perhaps for individuals, various individuals, because I struggled with it myself, quite honestly, Lindsay. And I think for me, I have to conclude that The Senate, while I was on the, on the 44 end, the minority end, the Senate in governing itself, and that's somewhat unique. Obviously, juries don't necessarily govern themselves, but the Senate governs itself in the sense that it determines its own constitutionality or jurisdiction. The Senate said by that vote of 56-44, yes, it is. And I think I honor that, I guess. At first, I was thinking maybe a lack of constitutionality in my own mind was reason enough to vote to acquit, but I wasn't expecting either that the hill for the managers to climb was going to be all that easy to climb. So I guess the short answer to that long one is, yeah, I do think that we're obligated to hear the facts and to judge it on its merits, not on the constitutional question, which we already answered in the affirmative.
Now, if this trial had been taking place while former President Trump were still in office, do you think that you would vote to convict then, or perhaps might consider that more likely?
I don't think I would consider it more likely because of the answer I just gave you. I think that, clearly if he was still president, there wouldn't have been a constitutional jurisdictional question for the United States Senate. And at that point, we would be dealing with the facts, on the first day rather than on the second day. So even at that, they would have to demonstrate a level of culpability that, I think would meet the standard for impeachment.
You've called this week the, quote, stupidest week in the Senate, and for many members of Congress, staffers, media members who were there January 6th this week has likely been emotionally traumatizing. In your view, if this week was not necessary, what measure of accountability do you think that the former president should face for his role for the events of January 6th?
Interesting point, because there's no question that his rhetoric was reckless. I was disappointed, frankly. I watched the speech as it was happening. I was disappointed, particularly in the things he was saying about the vice president, who's been so loyal, and so loyal not only to President Trump, but loyal to the Constitution. And I just thought that was really unfortunate and uncalled for. And for that, that recklessness, had Democrats tried something different, whether it's censure, I guess is the word that they like to use, or some sort of an admonishment, I'd have probably been open to something like that. Certainly, I've been quite public about my disappointment in the speech and the rally and whatnot. But at this point, they chose this other route, and I think it's pretty difficult now to ramp that back. But we'll see what happens tomorrow, and then the next day. And if there's not an impeachment, here's what I would think. And I would think that if they feel strongly about their case, or if some other federal prosecutors feel strongly about the case, they'll bring charges against the former president and try him with a jury of his peers and see if they can get a conviction that way.
Senator Kramer, we thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Joining us now is Delaware Democratic Senator Chris Coons. Senator, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Great to be on with you, Lindsay.
Would like to first start off with your reaction to what you've seen and heard the past 2 days, including the images played for the very first time.
Lindsay, this has been incredibly powerful. Many of us in the Senate didn't realize just how close an angry, violent mob came to harming Vice President Pence, to harming Speaker Pelosi, to attacking each of us individually. And so for us, for our families, for the other folks who are at risk here in the Capitol, the press, our staff, the people who keep us safe here, the Capitol Police, it's been a really challenging couple of days to be reminded just how difficult, just how violent, and just how dangerous the day here was on January 6th.
And as you say, that's what they've really been doing yesterday and today, recounting just how close, for example, Senator Romney was to the mob, just 58 steps. Now, we, of course, couldn't see the faces of the senators in the room, only the presentation. Can you take us inside the room? I mean, were there specific reactions that you noticed from your colleagues that stuck out to you?
Yes, a number of my Republican colleagues seemed shocked and overwhelmed by the evidence as it was being presented to us. Today, we heard in particular some recounting of the impact on our staff. And I remember looking at the front of the Senate chamber and seeing one of the members of the parliamentarian staff crying and the other comforting her. I was particularly moved, and some of my colleagues were as well, by a recounting that someone who's part of the custodial staff, someone who's African American, said, how degrading it felt to be put to work cleaning up the mess of these rioting white supremacists, cleaning up blood and feces and slanders that were the wreckage of this riot. So the emotional impact, the toll on those who were here was a key part, but frankly, so too was the testimony against Donald Trump. The evidence was so damning about how he summoned, incited, and then pointed at the Capitol this mob, and how little he did to ensure that we were safe, to send any help, or to check on his own vice president.
You say that you saw it for yourself. We've also heard some Republican colleagues of yours saying what they heard in these arguments moved them. Senator Thune called the presentation very moving. Senator Murkowski called the evidence damning. In your mind, is it possible that you all are able to get to the 17 Republican votes needed to convict?
Lindsay, I find it hard to imagine how anyone who is going to uphold their oath to do impartial justice can listen to this testimony and not conclude that President Trump violated his oath and deserves conviction.
Well, we just spoke with Senator Kramer. He sounded like his mind was made up. He simply said that he didn't feel the evidence was there to convince him that President Trump, former President Trump, had in fact incited the riot. So if it does turn out to be, by the end of the trial, that the votes just aren't there, would you support a censure resolution? There's also been talk of a 9/11-like commission.
I don't want to get there until we've had that vote, but we have to have accountability. We have to send a signal to history, to the American people, to President Trump, that we as a body understand that what happened on January 6th can't happen again. We heard compelling comments from Republican governors, from former members of President Trump's own cabinet, from members of the House and Senate who stood up to President Trump on this incident. The Senate needs to do its job, and if they fail, if Republicans won't vote to convict, then we need to pursue other ways that we can hold him accountable.
And to that point, if Republicans don't vote to convict, do you feel that this makes it a lot more difficult to negotiate with them in the future going forward?
I don't. Frankly, we've got a history of having very difficult moments here. The impeachment trial a year ago, the confirmation hearings of Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Barrett, and within a matter of weeks, finding some way to work together going forward. America's in crisis. We have to respond to the needs of the American people in this pandemic. Joe Biden was elected president on a platform of trying to bring us together. I view it as part of my job here to try and work together, even with people who I cannot understand how they could watch this evidence and fail to convict President Trump.
Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Let's bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl. John, the President Trump's defense team presents their case tomorrow. What do we know about their approach so far?
Lindsay, we know that they have 16 hours to respond to this forceful and detailed case that was laid out by the House managers, but that the president's attorneys are signaling that they plan to use a small fraction of that time. In fact, I'm told this could be as short as 2 or 3 hours. They will certainly hit that argument on constitutionality again, saying that this entire proceeding is unconstitutional because Trump is out of office. They will also make the case that Trump was simply exercising his free speech rights and he did nothing to incite that riot. One of his top attorneys said that the House managers presented a, quote, complete lack of evidence that Donald Trump was responsible for what happened on January 6th. So apparently they think they don't have to respond to very much.
Very interesting. Okay, Jonathan Karl, thanks so much.
Thank you, Lindsay.
And for more now, we bring in ABC News contributor and Cardozo law professor Kate Shaw. Thanks so much for joining us, Kate. Now, we're still hearing arguments that the impeachment was unconstitutional because Trump is no longer in office, that without a lengthy investigation, Trump was denied due process, and that Trump's speech is protected by the First Amendment. Are there merits to these claims?
Well, we'll have to see how the former president's team presents those arguments starting tomorrow, but I continue to find them pretty unpersuasive. So as to jurisdiction, right, whether the Senate has the power to hold a trial for an ex-official at all, it just seems to me it can't be the case that presidential misconduct late enough in a term is not subject to the sanction of impeachment, right? The Constitution contains this remedy for official misconduct of just this sort, and it just can't be right that if you do it late enough in a term, you escape this kind of accountability. Due process, I think the president's team did have time to prepare a case. I'm sure they could have had more, but, the managers, I am sure, would be facing accusations that they slow-walked these charges. They should have brought them sooner if we were, looking at a trial in March or April. And finally, on the First Amendment, I thought that Congressman Raskin was really effective today in making the case that the First Amendment doesn't really have any applicability in these proceedings at all. So even if you were a private citizen, you certainly don't have an absolute right to say whatever you want, and you don't have a right to incite violence. But even putting that to the side, public officials have very different First Amendment rights than the rest of us. So for better or worse, public school teachers or police officers can be subject to pretty serious sanction based on the things they say. And the First Amendment doesn't have much to say about it when they do. And so, the idea, so it's true about, senior federal government officials as well. When President Trump's senior cybersecurity official made the public statement that the election was free and fair and there wasn't widespread fraud, President Trump fired him. And nobody thought that was a First Amendment problem. So, public officials sometimes face consequences for their speech. And in my view, that's what impeachment is, a consequence. So the fact that it's speech, rhetoric at the core of the case, to me is not particularly relevant, but we'll have to see how the defense, gets kind of laid out starting tomorrow.
Just a little while ago, we heard from Senator Kramer that federal prosecutors or Democrats are free to pursue criminal charges in a court of law if the Senate conviction fails. Is there any precedent for former presidents facing criminal charges in court? And how do you think that the arguments that you've heard so far this week would play out if this were taking place in an actual courtroom? Do they have a case?
It is interesting. You've heard a number of Republican senators say things along those lines. So, former presidents, no, there isn't any square kind of precedent on point. There have been charges and trials of former vice presidents. So Aaron Burr was tried, actually not for killing Alexander Hamilton, but for treason. Vice President Spiro Agnew, Nixon's first vice president, pled guilty to tax evasion charges as he was leaving the vice presidency. It's likely, or at least it's possible, that President Nixon himself might have faced criminal charges. A lot of White House staff members and campaign officials had already pled guilty or been convicted for their involvement in Watergate, but he was pardoned by President Ford, which took that possibility off the table. So, it's certainly possible to criminally charge and try an ex-president. And I do think that the evidence that we have been hearing this week would make a powerful case for, either incitement of insurrection, which is a statutory crime, or seditious conspiracy. So it's very hard to know if you'd be able to get a conviction. Intent, state of mind, these are always difficult things to prove. But I do think there will be a judgment call to be made by the Biden Justice Department, whether it would set a dangerous precedent to charge an ex-president. There is certainly an argument that it would, or whether it would set a more dangerous precedent for there to appear to be no real accountability for these events. So that's, I think, going to be probably a subject of real debate inside the Biden Justice Department.
Right, really interesting arguments to be made there on both sides. Kate Shaw, thanks so much. When we come back, federal prosecutors outline coordination with extremists leading up to the mob riot. One person allegedly says that they were just outside of D.C. with guns, waiting for orders from President Trump to enter. We are on the ground in Myanmar, tracking the fight for democracy there as students, monks, and others stand up to the military who took charge of the government in a coup. But up next, 1 million doses of vaccine set to enter a pharmacy near you. Where and when, what you need to know.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any other newscast. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir.
We have made it through another week together.
America's #1 most watched newscast across all of television.
Robin Roberts, George Stephanopoulos, Michael Strahan. Wake up with America's #1 most watched morning show. ABC's
Good Morning America.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
ABC News honored winner for the second straight year with the Edward R. Murrow Award for overall excellence in television. ABC News, America's #1 news source. Friday nights, 9/8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime. 2020. Friday nights, 9/8 Central on ABC.
The reality is our country can collapse from within.
You see the white power movement on the march.
Klansmen and neo-Nazis, skinheads. It's meant to incite war.
From the KKK to Oklahoma City to Charlottesville, the new documentary event special.
We just need to start talking about race.
Homegrown Hate, The War Among Us.
This is a real wake-up call.
Streaming now on ABC News Live.
Now, when it matters most, the straightforward facts. ABC News is America's #1 news. #1 in the morning, #1 in the evening, with America's most watched newscast. #1 in late night versus the competition. The #1 news magazine on Friday nights. #1 in politics across this historic election versus the competition. The #1 daytime talk show. And #1 in streaming news. ABC News is America's #1 news.
When I got to office, there was no federal plan, none, to ship vaccines directly to local pharmacies. So folks who are allowed to get a vaccination under the state rules as the allocation of who gets in line are allowed to get one, can schedule an appointment now and get COVID-19 vaccine shots like they would a flu shot from their pharmacy. It will start today, that program.
That was President Biden today speaking at the National Institutes of Health, touting the new rollout of vaccines to major pharmacies this week. After touring a lab at the NIH, the president also offered a new timeline on when the nation will have enough vaccine for 300 million Americans, saying that it will actually happen a month earlier, by the end of July. And he also confirmed that the administration has signed final contracts for an additional 100 million doses each of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. So how will those vaccines now start to get out to the nation's pharmacies? Our Bob Woodruff takes a look in this week's Vaccine Watch.
A moment many have been waiting for. This week, COVID vaccine distribution is expanding to hundreds of additional pharmacies.
This is a historic moment.
This is it.
CVS and Walgreens are among the more than 20 major companies receiving vaccine shipments this week.
Pharmacies like Walgreens will have access to vaccine to administer to eligible individuals. Granted, the vaccine's limited initially, but it does mark a great milestone of the next phase of vaccine distribution.
We've got about 350 stores going live.
The Biden administration says it will start shipping 1 million doses per week in the next phase of expanding access to the vaccine.
Is that realistic?
Well, that's where we're starting. Our hope actually is that we're able to get, vaccines well in excess of that.
The hope is not only to speed up the government's mass vaccination campaign, but also to address the growing disparities in vaccinations across the country.
As you look across the United States, 85% of Americans live within 10 miles of a CVS pharmacy.
More than 75% of Americans actually live within 5 miles of a Walgreens.
While data is sparse, an ABC News analysis indicates Black Americans have been vaccinated at rates significantly lower than white Americans, and often at levels below their share of their state's population.
Unfortunately, the information we have so far suggests that the vaccines are disproportionately going to more advantaged communities, especially white Americans as compared to Americans of color.
Experts say opening up vaccination sites at CVS and Walgreens might help, but it's just the first step.
We hope that it will help ease some of the access issues. However, there is a reason to be concerned that it won't fully solve the problem. So if you look at where these pharmacies are located, they tend not to be located in the highest risk areas. This is going to vary from state to state, county to county.
According to the CDC, Black Americans are 3 times more likely to die of COVID compared to white Americans. Both CVS and Walgreens hope to reach these communities.
As we're bringing pharmacies online, we are looking at things like the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index as one of our key criteria for saying, where are the locations that have typically been underserved, where we can make an immediate impact by, opening up stores.
What we've done is to ensure that there's equitable access is that close to 50% of the stores that will receive vaccine through the Federal Pharmacy Partnership Program are in underserved communities or in communities of color.
Both Walgreens and CVS have updated their apps to help customers determine their eligibility.
There'll be an easy banner just like this one here, right? Get your COVID-19 vaccine, schedule now.
For now, the process will be by appointment only.
And then we want to educate people right there, right? That, hey, this is not, a one and done shot. This is a round trip ticket. You need, two doses for this to be effective. We'll have the patient input their zip code and then search for stores near them. And then we'll show them, different CVS locations that have vaccine available, for that particular appointment time. We're nationwide. Our systems all talk to each other. So if someone is in New York for their first shot and Florida for their second shot, they would be able to get both, vaccines from us with the system completely tied.
About 10% of the country has received at least one dose of the vaccine so far. Experts maintain that at least 70% of the population needs to be immune to this virus before we can return to some semblance of normalcy.
Even though it's very limited and it can be frustrating for many of our customers, the opportunity we have is that every week more and more vaccine will become available. So our ask is to all of our patients and customers is to be patient.
I do think that, there's a light at the end of the tunnel here where we're going to be able to get the vaccine to a lot more people a lot quicker.
This is Bob Woodruff, tracking the vaccine.
Our thanks to Bob. Still ahead here on Prime, the deadly highway pileup. Dozens rushed to the hospital, people trapped in the wreckage on a busy highway. The doctor fired for giving away 10 doses before they were set to expire, and why some are now coming to his defense. And the latest job numbers are out, and women, especially women of color, continue to bear the brunt of a struggling economy. We take a look by the numbers, but first, our tweet of the day. So many paying tribute to Chick Corea, the legendary and influential master of the keyboard who played with greats like Miles Davis, passed away at 79. Q-Tip among those who tweeted saying, R.I.P. to one of the coldest pianists, keyboardists, songwriters of all time.
Assault on the Capitol, the ABC News original, exclusively on Hulu, now streaming. With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any other newscast. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir.
We have made it through another week together.
America's #1 most watched newscast across all of television. Assault on the Capitol, the ABC News original, exclusively on Hulu, now streaming.
Tomorrow, kick off a love-filled weekend with Reese's big announcement, a Disney-sized surprise, and the friends and their dogs will make you feel the love on GMA.
Sex, gambling, fraud, betrayal, and murder. Cutthroat Inc., the podcast. A family on a mission to find their son. A year's worth of conversations with the killer. Cutthroat Inc. Subscribe for free now on your favorite podcast app.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
ABC News honored winner for the second straight year with the Edward R. Murrow Award for Overall Excellence in Television. ABC News, America's #1 news source.
Welcome back, everyone. We now turn to some hopeful U.S. job numbers out today, but we also take a closer look at the employment picture for America's women, minorities, and low-wage workers by the numbers. 793,000 Americans filed new unemployment claims last week, a substantial drop from the previous week, and a sign that layoffs are slowing down. 6.3% is the U.S. unemployment rate, which is also trending down. But here's a bit of bad news. Millions of Americans have stopped looking for work, and if that was accounted for, the unemployment rate would actually be nearly 10%, Fed Chair Jerome Powell said this week. And more than 2.3 million American women have left the labor force altogether since the pandemic began, bringing the women's labor participation rate, which includes those working and seeking work, down to 57%. That's the lowest since the late 1980s, according to the National Women's Law Center. The unemployment rate for black women is now 8.5%, and for Latinas, it's 8.8%. And finally, employment for workers who earn earn less than $30,000 a year dropped 14% during 2020, but it actually grew by 1% for those who make at least $85,000 a year, according to a report by the New York Fed. Still lots to get to here tonight on Prime. Many are wondering what the fate of President Trump's border wall might be. Tonight, President Biden gives us the clearest indication yet. Meghan Markle wins a major legal victory, we'll explain. And the figure skater breaking barriers one incredible video at a time. But first, a look at our top trending stories on abcnews.com.
Reality is our country can collapse from within.
You see the white power movement on the march. Klansmen and neo-Nazis, skinheads, it's meant to incite war.
From the KKK to Oklahoma City to Charlottesville, the new documentary event special.
We just need to start talking about race.
Homegrown Hate, The War Among Us.
This is a real wake-up call.
Streaming now on ABC News Live.
Friday nights, 9/8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime. 2020. Friday nights, 9/8 Central on ABC.
He conned his way through love.
He was a rock star surgeon.
That George Clooney type of feel, sexy.
And the wedding of a lifetime.
Andrea Bocelli was going to be singing. The guest list just kept growing.
The icing on the cake was the Pope was going to marry them. Are you kidding?
But when he put lives at risk, the con is up.
The doctor should be jailed for what he did.
If we don't do anything, a lot of people will die.
Now, as this doctor faces criminal charges, the 2020 event, Friday night on ABC.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
House impeachment managers have finished their opening arguments in former President Trump's second impeachment trial. The arguments focusing on the single charge of incitement of insurrection.
This was not a hidden crime. The president told them to be there, and so they actually believed they would face no punishment.
Democrats taking senators who were seated as jurors through the January 6th Capitol Hill riot frame by frame, using the perspective of Trump's own supporters to show how the mob repeatedly echoed the former president's words. The impeachment managers arguing that Trump started encouraging the mob long before the election.
January 6th was a culmination of the president's actions, not an aberration from them.
Is this America? What is your answer to that question? Is this okay? If not, what are we going to do about it? These people matter. These people who risk their lives for us.
Some encouraging signs now in the fight against the relentless coronavirus pandemic. The COVID tracking project says cases are going down in every region of the U.S. And the 7-day average of daily vaccinations is now higher than President Biden's original goal of 1.5 million a day, according to an internal HHS memo obtained by ABC News.
We're now on track to have enough supply for 300 million Americans by the end of July.
The CDC says quarantine is no longer necessary for fully vaccinated people after exposure to COVID-19 if they're asymptomatic.
Today in Chicago, the first wave of students back to the classroom as the CDC gets ready to release new guidelines for schools. Dr. Anthony Fauci saying children as young as first grade could be authorized by September to receive the vaccine, with the vaccine open to all Americans, not just high-risk groups, as early as April.
The Kansas City Chiefs have let Britt Reed go. He was a linebackers coach on the team, son of the head coach. The younger Reed is under investigation after a car crash that left a young girl critically injured.
Also out of work, Gina Carano. The former MMA fighter turned actress will not be returning to the Disney Plus hit The Mandalorian. A Lucasfilm spokesperson cited the star's abhorrent and unacceptable social media posts. In one, Carano implied being a Republican is like being Jewish during the Holocaust. Talent agency UTA has also dropped the star.
Hi, I'm Hassan Gogol, emergency response physician from Harris County Public Health.
This is back when Dr. Gokul still had a job. He was fired from his government position and charged with stealing 10 COVID vaccine doses. Now he's telling his side. In an interview with the New York Times, Dr. Gokul claims the vial he took had to be used within 6 hours or it would be wasted. He says after making house calls, he gave the vaccine to the elderly, like a woman in her 80s with dementia. Another went to a mother with a child who uses a ventilator. The last dose went to his wife, who has a pulmonary disease. A judge has since dismissed the charges brought against the doctor, but the 48-year-old Pakistani immigrant is still without a job and now a name sullied.
A big legal victory tonight for the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle. A British judge ruled that the Mail newspaper invaded Markle's privacy by publishing a personal letter to her estranged father. Markle, the wife of Prince Harry, sued the newspaper's publisher. The paper and its website printed large portions of the letter Markle wrote in 2018 following her wedding to the prince. The paper is considering an appeal.
Welcome back. The investigation into the mob riot continues. This week, of course, we've seen some shocking and stunning videos of the chaos, some of that footage that we saw for the first time. And tonight we're learning more about the suspects and what prosecutors are saying about just what they plan to do, saying that they were well armed and organized. Our Pierre Thomas reports.
Tonight, chilling new evidence that a special squad armed with guns may have been waiting for a signal from President Trump to join the insurrection. Federal authorities claiming the Oath Keepers militia had conducted war games prior to the attack and were planning for urban warfare. Prosecutors referencing several videos in building their cases. According to an affidavit, some of this planning took place in November when suspected Oath Keeper Jessica Watkins, seen here, discussed operational plans with co-defendant Thomas Caldwell. Plans that included establishing a quick reaction force stationed near the Capitol to provide weapons and await orders to enter D.C. under permission from Trump, not a minute sooner. 2 days before the insurrection, Watkins allegedly texted another associate about bringing guns to the Capitol.
Every single in there is a traitor. Every single one.
Caldwell, seen in this video, is accused of organizing a militia squad. And tonight, a new accusation against Caldwell. Agents allegedly finding, quote, a death list in his home with names of potential targets. Lindsay?
Our thanks to Pierre for that. Tonight, large swaths of America picking up the pieces after a sprawling and deadly ice storm. Take a look at these images. Twisted metal with as many as 100 vehicles wedged into one another in a pre-dawn chain reaction crash in Fort Worth. At least 6 people were killed. Dozens rushed to the hospital. The storm that caused this mess created havoc from Texas to the Northeast. This Atlanta-bound plane skidded off the runway in Pittsburgh. Rob Marciano joins us now. Rob, this relentless winter just far from over. What are you tracking for us tonight?
Well, more waves of winter precip over that stubborn cold air. What a horrific accident there in Dallas. But you were right. It's a sprawling ice storm from Texas all the way into the mid-Atlantic. Tonight, the ice is now, or the freezing rain is in through Waco, south of Dallas. That'll be on the wane, becoming more rain. But look at Kentucky, eastern Kentucky, and through West Virginia, the mid-Atlantic. That's where the icing and snow is going to be a problem overnight tonight into tomorrow morning. Raleigh, Roanoke, Greensboro, Richmond, you're going to be in it. Very difficult travel, if at all. If you could stay home, certainly do that. And then a reinforcing shot of brutal cold air again in through this weekend. This while a northwest storm is hitting Portland and Seattle. Lowland snow there. That drives into the Intermountain West here in the next day or two. Quickly get through Chicago, Detroit, a couple of inches of snow there, and then it kind of winds up again for potentially another nor'easter Saturday and Sunday for the Northeast, with winter precip coming there. This while the cold remains entrenched, it looks like, into next week, 25 to 50 degrees below average. And with this sort of pattern, it's a very active storm track for the eastern third of the country. So you're right. We are into winter, and it doesn't want to let up.
Another nor'easter potentially on the way. We're still digging out from the last one. Rob, thanks so much. President Biden is putting a stop to the emergency order his predecessor used to fund the border wall. Biden informing Congress that he's rescinding Trump's national emergency declaration on the southern border. He called it, quote, unwarranted. That order had allowed the Trump administration to divert billions of taxpayer dollars to build the wall. More than 450 miles of walls already been built, mostly replacing existing barriers, but the construction has now paused. President Biden has also ordered new sanctions and is promising to do more more as the fight for democracy in Myanmar is now heating up. Protesters remain defiant against the military that seized power at the beginning of the month. The seizure of power reversed the democratic gains that nation had made. So what happens next? Ian Pannell reports.
On the streets of Myanmar, sit-ins, chanting, and marches. People trying to make their voices heard against a violent and oppressive military junta that's once again taken control of the country. Over the past few days, protests in the country have swelled. 27-year-old Shan Mayong joined tens of thousands of others, peacefully taking to the streets to declare, "We will fight for our democracy."
I can risk my life to get the democracy back.
Myanmar spent decades under repressive military rule. In 2015, Aung San Suu Kyi became the first democratically elected leader after years under house arrest. She was re-elected late last year, her party taking the majority of seats. But the all-powerful military disputed the results. And a little over a week ago, they detained Aung San Suu Kyi, and she hasn't been heard from or seen since. In an attempt to quash the opposition, the country's military shutting down the internet in some parts of the country and imposing a nationwide curfew. But so far, it hasn't deterred protesters. From women in elegant ball gowns to Buddhist monks in flowing robes, and ethnic minority groups coming out to protest in support in a striking show of unity. Demonstrators holding up the three-finger salute from the Hunger Games film that was adopted by Thai protesters last year, a show of resistance against the junta. Some placing red roses on the body armour of police as they held the line. But in a warning of what may be to come, police at times responding with force. One terrible incident has rallied the crowds. This woman in critical condition after being shot in the back of her head. Shan led a group of his students to the US Embassy building in Yangon today.
Everyone deserves to live free in every country.
These protests are different from those of the past, he says. The people have now had a taste of democracy for 5 years, and they're not ready to let it go and go back to the days where dissent could mean death.
I already lived in my life. Today is the last day. It's time to change for our country. So I fight for generation, for my generation, for my people.
Just yesterday, President Biden approved an executive order allowing the US to sanction individuals and entities connected to the coup. But for now, the military is standing ground. They're even drafting a draconian internet security bill that would require providers to give up users' information. Those deemed a threat can face up to 3 years in jail. And even though the protests haven't turned bloody yet, fear of violence hangs over Myanmar. For days, police have stood threateningly behind barricades in Yangon, Myanmar's largest city, but the protests seem only to grow in what's become a dangerous zero-sum game.
I want the world to have us. We don't want to back to the darkness again.
Ian Pannell for ABC News Live.
Those protests not dying down, our thanks to Ian. And when we return, it's not just these breathtaking videos that make this such a beautiful story.
I know what happened, and I'm not guilty.
Why the fascination with criminal trials? Figure out what's really out there.
She revealed she had murdered his family.
I know in my heart they did this.
It's the time of suspicion.
The ending's really tough.
You don't know whether truth is going to be difficult to find unless you try to find it.
He conned his way through love.
He was a rock star surgeon. That George Clooney type of feel, sexy.
And the wedding of a lifetime.
Andrea Bocelli was going to be singing. The guest list just kept growing. The icing on the cake was the Pope was going to marry them.
Are you kidding me?
But when he put lives at risk, the con is up.
The doctor should be jailed for what he did.
If we don't do anything, a lot of people will die.
Now, as this doctor faces criminal charges, the 2020 event, Friday night on ABC.
The reality is our country can collapse from within.
You see the white power movement on the march. Klansmen and neo-Nazis, skinheads, it's meant to incite war.
From the KKK to Oklahoma City to Charlottesville, the new documentary event special.
We just need to start talking about race.
Homegrown Hate, the war among us.
This is a real wake-up call.
Streaming now on ABC News Live.
Welcome back. His widely shared and breathtaking videos have exposed a new audience to figure skating, and that may be just the point. Ariel Reshef has more on the skater who is using his talent to fight for inclusion.
They're the captivating images of a figure skater turned social media phenom. Elaj Balde spinning and cutting into the wild ice, flanked by the majestic mountains of Alberta, Canada.
I'm out there in nature skating on ice. I truly am connected to the now.
His videos viewed hundreds of thousands of times. The 30-year-old is quickly becoming one of the most recognizable faces of the sport, shattering norms, infusing his own blend of pop culture, athleticism, and activism. Mesmerizing with his signature backflips and killer jump combinations. Elaj was born in Russia. His family immigrated to Canada when he was a toddler.
My dad's from Africa, Guinea, West Africa, and my mom's from Russia. Immigrating to Canada at the age of 2, it was very much, growing up in a lot of underserved communities, and started skating at the age of 6.
He was raised on the ice, but he says he never fully felt at home.
Growing up as a young black boy within the figure skating world was a bit confusing at times, because I identified with rappers, with hip hop artists, with hip hop dancers, break dancers, basketball players, football players. I identified with a lot of athletes and artists that looked like me, but that were not within the figure skating realm. And I didn't see that in skating.
His skating career, a series of emotional ups and downs. As Elaj harnessed his talent and gained competitive edge, he says he struggled to find his place.
The journey was a lot of beautiful moments and a lot of very difficult moments to deal with. I really view my skating career as an incredible learning curve and a learning opportunity for me to grow, not only as an athlete, but as a human being.
I can tell you, and anecdotally, growing up, being a figure skater myself, I rarely saw diversity on the ice. Why do you think that is?
The lack of representation, I think, is something that doesn't allow for a young boy or young girl from the BIPOC community to look at that sport and truly feel like they could be part of it. There's accessibility to rinks. A lot of underserved communities don't have rinks. On top of that, the sport is just extremely expensive. Even for me and my family, my parents, we struggled to be able to afford to skate.
Since the first Winter Olympics in 1924, only 2 out of the 271 medals awarded for figure skating are held by black skaters. Now, Elaj has found a calling in carving a space for more representation in his beloved sport, co-creating the Figure Skating Diversity Inclusion Alliance.
Black people don't figure skate.
People play basketball. We run track. We don't skate like that.
Helping to not only raise awareness, but funding as well.
What has the response been so far inside the skating community?
It's truly been a beautiful experience for a lot of us within the skating community. We've been able to create a worldwide community of skaters, not just in the US and in Canada, but in France and Europe. I think this is one of the most important steps that I think we need to do within our community, is heal some of the experiences that we've had and have a space where it's safe to do that. there's a lot of obstacles in the way for a skater of color. And we're committed to seeing more representation in the sport, and we're committing to increasing accessibility for these skaters.
How do you feel like sports, figure skating, can play a role in social justice?
Yeah, I mean, sports are, microcosms of society. And so, I think sports can be leaders in change and for social justice. I've seen a lot of sports step up. I've seen a lot of national sports organizations step up. I've seen a lot of athletes step up. And I think it's a beautiful thing to see.
And he's weaving that message into his craft. Following the death of George Floyd and the racial reckoning, Elijah's performances have become an artistic expression of the movement for change.
What motivates you?
To live in a better world. To live in a world where you see unity, you see people that operate from the space of love and not from the space of fear.
Ariel Reshef, ABC News, New York.
Whoever thought that slipping on a pair of ice skates could potentially lead to so much change? Our thanks to Ariel for that. And finally, tonight, our image of the day. Take a look at this French nun. She is the oldest person in Europe known to have survived COVID. How old is Lucille Randon? 117 years old, and she told reporters that she never developed symptoms and didn't even realize she had the virus. Fun fact, Lucille is actually the oldest person in Europe, the oldest person in the world. That is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Have a great night.
Today we are bringing together 7